Hey guys, I'm Lainey Law.
And I'm attorney Andrew Myers.
Today we're coming at you in a little bit of a different setting. We're going to be talking about what's been going on in New Hampshire and legalization of weed. So we wanted to get in this special episode of About the Law in for you guys so we could discuss a little bit about what's happening. There's, been a lot of talk about it, a lot of articles flying around. I personally have been able to relatively keep my head below the dirt and not know what's going on. So today Andrew is going to tell us about what's been happening, the decisions that are going to be made. You made a couple good points before that. You said that things might even change, so this is just more of a ongoing discussion that we're going to be having. So Andrew, can you summarize for us basically what's been happening? It sounds like it got that they were proposing a bill and that bill got rejected.
Yes, there was a bill and it went through the House. It passed. It seems like every year there's been an effort in New Hampshire over recent years to try and legalize recreational weed. Medicinal marijuana was approved several years ago, but getting recreational marijuana passed in New Hampshire has been an uphill battle for those who are proponents. As you know, every other New England state has legalized recreational marijuana, and New Hampshire, the live free or die state, has not. So the bill came up in the New Hampshire House of Representatives, which is one of the largest representative bodies in the entire world. There are 400 members of the New Hampshire House. And when it came up for a vote, it passed by a supermajority of 70% voted for it. Legislative procedure in the New Hampshire State House requires that after a bill passes the House successfully, it goes over to the Senate to face all 24 state senators. But what happened over there was with this bill, the Senate voted 14-10 to kill the bill. I don't think the fight is over yet, because on the very day that the state Senate voted against it, Governor Chris Sununu made a statement saying, "Hey guys," and this is funny because Governor Sununu had stayed in the sidelines during the whole debate as it went through the committees in the House and then went to a House vote and then went through consideration in the Senate, and all the way until the very last day when they voted. Governor Sununu remained in the background and didn't say anything. But after the no vote, then the governor came out and made a statement that, hey, you know what? I think I would sign a bill legalizing recreational marijuana if it were controlled similarly to the way New Hampshire controls liquor. For those few people that don't know, New Hampshire has a monopoly. You cannot buy a bottle of liquor in New Hampshire unless you go to one of the liquor stores. So that's where it sits now. There are two schools of thought right now. One school of thought is that, how in the very last minute when the legislature haggles over a budget, which they've got to pass by the end of the legislative session, there's a lot of horse trading. I'll pass your bill if you vote for my bill. And so there's some thinking that the legalization of weed in New Hampshire will be subject to that, and it'll slide in at the last minute. Others, including the president of the New Hampshire Senate, a guy by the name of Jeb Bradley, have said no. If we're going to legalize weed in New Hampshire, we're going to do it properly, and we're going to do it, with full drafting and redrafting and consideration in committees. So, as you and I sit here today, and I wouldn't take any bets. I wouldn't even bet the coffee money one way or the other. And I think anybody that makes a prediction needs to, put their money on it. So that's where it stands. And there are a lot of considerations on both sides.
And like you mentioned, like the liquor stores, so it is possible, I guess it sounds like, that theoretically, if something like that were to pass, that the way that New Hampshire has like state-run liquor stores, we could potentially be looking at like, you know, state-run dispensaries and things like that, which is like interesting to me. You know, like you said, that they're talking about making a separate committee and separating that aspects, but something about New Hampshire, we don't have sales tax, and with our state-run liquor stores, we don't have taxes on that, and we actually have a lot cheaper liquor than other states. So it'd be interesting to see in New Hampshire, where we have state-run dispensaries, that could be theoretically charging less than what people are driving over for Massachusetts when they're paying all these crazy taxes. Or theoretically, New Hampshire could potentially have its own type of taxes, it sounds like, right?
Well, yeah, the bill that was just defeated would have put a 12.5% tax on marijuana, recreational marijuana. And of that, interestingly, for those of us who complain that we pay a lot of property taxes, you know, we have no sales tax, we have no income tax in New Hampshire. So the proposal was that half of all of the tax money that's raised through legal sale of recreational marijuana would go to education and reducing property taxes. Although if that happened, I would
The property taxes aren't going down.
No,
it's going towards the property taxes.
no.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Another 30% would go towards the state's liability in its pension funds, and the other 20% would go for both substance abuse and other programs in the Department of Health and Human Services. So from a financial point of view, a lot of people are saying, hey, let's do it. I'm of two minds. I can see both sides of the argument. Why should New Hampshire let all the surrounding states make all the money when stereotypically everybody knows people come in from Massachusetts and other bordering states to buy booze, to buy cigarettes, to buy fireworks? What am I leaving out? I know I'm leaving something out.
I mean,
And everything
theoretically,
else,
guns.
People pile into Salem and Seabrook and Keene and Portsmouth and all the other border towns because we have no sales or income tax. You can come in and buy your big ticket stuff here and take it home. The legality on the big ticket items aside. But anyhow, I think New Hampshire's looking the other way on the fact that it makes a ton of money on cigarettes, booze, fireworks, all that good stuff. Why not weed? Because don't anybody in the audience, and raise your hand in the audience if you think that anybody's not smoking marijuana because it's illegal in New Hampshire. You know?
And it's like funny that you say like people are like coming in like from all our border towns, like get the cigarettes, get the booze. And in Tingsboro, like right on, like between Tingsboro and Nashville, right where the mall is, on exit, I guess it's exit 90 or exit 2 theoretically. Yeah, Nature's Remedy is like right there by the mall. It's just like right across the state line, and it's just like that place is so busy that like I don't know if this has changed, but before they used to do like only mobile orders. So it's just like you go, you pick it up, and you leave. And it's like that busy that they have a line, and it's just like people coming and going. And presumably like most of their clientele would be from New Hampshire. A lot of the times you go to these dispensaries that are a little bit deeper in Massachusetts, and you can walk around and hang out. So it's a little bit interesting to see that it's just like we're having right now the opposite, where instead of people are rushing to New Hampshire, it's just like, where instead they're putting up these little dispensaries on the border, trying to entice New Hampshire people. So people from New Hampshire are earning their, no income tax money and then spending it elsewhere, which, is just...
And New Hampshire has always been just a little bit crazy on that respect. There are some issues that have been raised. One of them, and it's a national issue really, is that if you get stopped for drunk driving, there's a .08 and there's an intoxilizer that you take the test, or you go to the hospital and there's a blood test. There's an argument that the breath test and the blood test are not equal. And if you want to fight the breath test, you can if you can afford $5,000 for an expert. But blood tests are fairly certain. If you have a .08 or higher, they've got you. Defense attorneys, yes, I know there are some valid defenses, but for the sake of argument, marijuana does not have a reliable test. There have actually been some quote unquote intoxilizers for THC, but there's a problem with that. One is that there's no recognized national standard for what type of THC or what level of THC actually causes somebody to be impaired driving. That's number one. Number two, no two people are necessarily affected the same by THC. Some people can have a very high THC level and show no impairment. Other people have a very low level of THC tolerance and they have a very little bit and they can't drive a car. So even though national law enforcement has worked extremely hard and every now and then they've made announcements, oh, we've got it now, they don't have it now. There is no reliable way to test for that. So I think law enforcement does have a legitimate argument that there's no real way to test people for that. On the other hand, like I said before, they're smoking it anyhow, so why not legalize it?
And I guess how you mentioned like law enforcement not having a way to test for it, I don't know how necessarily this what kind of testing they can do for this kind of stuff, but it makes me think that this is just like my own personal thought where like, yes, we can test for alcohol, but there's so many different scenarios of like DUIs, like New Hampshire has like the opioid crisis, so it's just like people are nodding off at their wheel, like theoretically, like I don't really know how that goes, but I'm curious. I'd imagine that there's not really a specific way to test for that. So even though like alcohol is legal and that would be like a big difference, I guess like my thought is like from the legal aspect, from like trying to get these people who are legally consuming product not on the road, I guess my thought personally with that is like I wouldn't see that as I'm just a civilian, I don't have legal background, but it's just like you all have these people that are doing DUIs with all these other substances that we don't necessarily have a test for. I guess for me personally, it makes sense that they would want a way to test for it, but I think that there's just so many different aspects where like I feel like it'd be like just impossible to test of all these different types of DUIs and things along that nature.
The police can get a conviction. It's harder, but the police can get a conviction based on just observations. The car was weaving back and forth. The car was driving at night without its headlights. The person got out of the car and they were slurring and stumbling around. I mean, it is possible to get a conviction with alcohol or anything else if there is strong evidence, and I mean strong evidence of impairment through the observations that I just said. But that's an issue. You just touched on another issue that people, and I'm going to read a little bit from the article in the Manchester Union Leader, that people were actually voting against this because they say that marijuana is a gateway drug. And at the time now when we have such the large number of fentanyl problems, now is not the time to legalize marijuana. And one quote from one of the state senators who voted against was that this is a segue to the illicit black market to come in and undercut and cause more harm, more addiction, and more death. So there's an argument. I see you laughing. There's an argument that, and I remember this from way long ago. I'm older than I look, I think. I remember a long time ago, people said, well, if they're smoking marijuana, before you know it, they're going to be doing heroin. And it's like, I don't know. I think studies go both ways on that. And I don't want to get personal on this, but I think probably there are people out there that have been smoking marijuana for a very long time. They're never going to do heroin. I mean, it's kind of like, I saw that as kind of a crazy argument. The funny thing was, how we talked in one of our other blog posts about studies and how studies can go both ways? Well, the New Hampshire senators, when they were arguing this bill, were all arguing studies, and the studies went both ways. read a little bit. Both sides cited research that came to opposite conclusions. This is according to the Manchester Union leader. Senate President Jeb Bradley, a Republican of Wolfboro, cited a Journal of American Medicine report that concluded that frequent use of cannabis by young people could lead to a decline of 8 points in IQ by mid-adulthood.
Mm-hmm.
There are other studies that say that studies conclude that youth drug use and crime have not gone up in the 21 states that have legalized marijuana. Cannabis legalization will not increase crime. Let's look at the data and look at the facts. And so one more place in the world where studies and research go both ways. You know, you pick a side of the argument and you're going to find a study that supports you. So that's, you know, I don't think there's really, to quote a rock star, there is no political solution.
And, you know, like how you mentioned, the studies go both ways. And how you mentioned, like, with decline, like it leads to, you know, IQ decline in youths. With a lot of the states, a lot of the age to be able to purchase is, I think, typically 21, like alcohol. So even though your brain's not fully developed at 21, you know, a lot of people are like ending college by that point too, which is like fully matured. I have clients, I do some side work as a hairdresser, and one of my clients mentioned that not one of their own kids, but another youth in their life had repeatedly been getting in trouble at school because they keep finding them with these weed vapes. And that, I think, is another valid concern that people would have, is just like, oh, well, it's increasing accessibility. But these vapes, people are already getting these vapes. And I think that things, because when you think about it, it's just like kids historically get their hands on alcohol. Kids historically, you know, get their hands on a lot of bad things that they shouldn't be getting. But I guess something that I would think would also be a concern, like you mentioned, like the problem with fentanyl and that we have all these other crises, is where when something you're making, what they decriminalized possession of marijuana, fortunately, a while back in New Hampshire, but by making, you know, these hurdles to get through to get these substances, it's one of my concerns, especially with the vape things, is that youths would potentially be getting access to things that maybe aren't, you know, quality controlled regulation. I got a vape cart from someone. This was back when weed was legal in Massachusetts, but my friend's like, oh, you want to get this from me? It's just like, all right, like whatever. And obviously I never got it again because when I used it, I started developing like mouth sores, and that was like, delicious.
Oh my gosh, that's awful.
So
one of the things that I found kind of interesting was that even though weed has been made legal in some states, people have found that they're still buying it illegally. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal back on May 6th that cited only California and New York. But the article, front page Wall Street Journal article, lengthy article, went into detail pointing out that people are still buying marijuana illegally in New York and California, largely because those two states have taxed the you know what out of it. And you know, so I mean, the article also mentioned a place that grows marijuana in Massachusetts, and they were only complaining because they geared up to sell to New York, because New York and Massachusetts border each other out in the western part of the state. So this marijuana farm started growing marijuana for New York in Massachusetts, and they found that their initial studies of how much they were going to be able to sell to New York were far overdone because people are still buying it illegally in New York and California. So if New Hampshire is going to legalize marijuana, they obviously need to study what went wrong in those two states. And there was money in the bill. The bill goes on and on and on forever, and I did read through it. And it does provide the New Hampshire Liquor Commission with some money to research in the first 18 months of implementation and to determine the best way to do it. But New Hampshire, here's what I would do. Nobody ever asked me, but here's what I would do. You know what? New Hampshire already has these huge liquor stores at the borders in Portsmouth, in Seabrook, in Salem, at the Hooksett rest areas. These are huge liquor stores. Here's my idea. Just take a part of those stores that are so huge, clear some of those bottles. Have you ever been to these stores? They're huge.
Massive. Yeah.
So just clear out one section and sell the marijuana products there. We've already got the infrastructure. They could do this, okay, not tomorrow, but they could do this in 30 days. No, they're not going to do this. They're going to have us, if it's legalized, they'll start a whole new sub-bureaucracy within the Liquor Commission, and then they will open different facilities and build new physical plant, and they'll have a whole new department and sub-department and commission, and just it'll be a mess, and they'll study it and think about it. And I think if they were smart, they could do it in 30 days and regulate it. Those stores I just mentioned are all in areas where they're all on high traffic roads, and the police can watch it, law enforcement can have a good presence in that area. So I think New Hampshire could do it right. And I have strongly mixed feelings about the whole thing, but if people are going to go to Massachusetts and Vermont, and how hard is it to go from Portsmouth over into Maine, I think New Hampshire's missing the boat. That's all.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we do have the liquor stores in place already, and that would make sense. And especially even now, like say theoretically they didn't want to have like walk-in stores, there's already an infrastructure for mobile ordering, like we discussed, like with Tingsboro, with Nature's Remedy, where people can just go on their phone, order online, and do pickup. Something to implement like that in the liquor stores that we already have wouldn't even be that difficult, in my opinion. So I guess my question to you would be, what exactly was this bill proposing, and what kind of limitations would we be having because of that?
A couple of really specific things that are in the bill. It would decriminalize the possession of up to 4 ounces. Each individual would be able to have 4 ounces of marijuana for recreational purposes. However, consuming any marijuana while driving would be prohibited. You cannot smoke marijuana while you're driving under this bill. The other thing is that it would give communities an opt-out. If there are any towns or cities that are really against having marijuana sold within their municipal boundaries, they could vote to opt out. That's happened in Massachusetts, actually. If you've followed the news, there's some towns in Massachusetts that just for whatever reason, they brought it up for a vote, and they will not allow marijuana sales in their cities and towns. That's happened there. And if there are cities and towns in New Hampshire, if the bill passes in its current form, which we never know, there are towns that could opt out of that. The other thing is that the bill, as it is phrased now, would appropriate up to $15.6 million to study getting this thing right. Because as I pointed out before, California and New York didn't get it right, and there's still big illegal sales. And New Hampshire would spend $15.5 million to study to make sure that they do it correctly.
That's crazy. That it's like crazy to me that it's so expensive, especially considering that there's so much going on. But like you said, it's like, and New York was like relatively recent with legalizing it. So it's interesting out of all the places that New York is having like these issues with the illegal sales still going on so high, especially because it's just like it's so recent. Like you would think that they'd learn something, like, but
Right, really.
what can you do? Yeah.
The other weird thing about this whole legalization thing that's happening nationwide in different states, state by state, is marijuana is still illegal federally.
Mm-hmm.
The federal government still holds it illegal. That's raised some issues, and that wouldn't change if New Hampshire made recreational marijuana legal. As far as we know, legalizing it on the federal level is extremely controversial, and I wouldn't put any money on that happening anytime soon. Two problems that has raised is that, number one, a lot of the banks will not give you a bank account if you're running a business that's an illegal business. Think about any other illegal business. I'm not going to name them, but think of any illegal business where you could walk into a bank and say, "Oh, geez, I'm a drug dealer. I want to open up a bank account." No, they're not going to let you do it. So when marijuana was first made illegal in Massachusetts, the banks, which are federally regulated and federally insured by the FDIC, they said, "No, we're not going to set you up a bank account." Now, many of the banks have and attorneys for the businesses have found ways around that, but it's an issue. And I would surmise that a lot of the banks in New Hampshire would have problems setting up bank accounts, because in this day and age, how do you have a business and not have a bank account, especially if people, as you had mentioned before, are ordering it online? The other weird issue is that, as you know, I do bankruptcies also. And to do a Chapter 13 bankruptcy, you need to show the court that you have adequate income to fund a Chapter 13 plan. And a federal judge in Massachusetts recently denied a guy a Chapter 13 plan. He had enough money to fund his plan, and under different circumstances, that Chapter 13 plan would have been confirmed or approved. But that judge says, no, this guy is illegal in Massachusetts drug business, but the federal government views that as illegal, and bankruptcy is a federal court matter. And so, no, they refused to confirm his Chapter 13 plan, which otherwise was fine. It was written out properly. And the other issue that just in my mind hasn't really been resolved is, how do you file your taxes with the IRS if your business is a legal in state law marijuana dispensary? How do you do that? I mean, your ABC marijuana dispensary in XYZ town, Massachusetts, and maybe someday New Hampshire, we don't know. How do you file your taxes? Because you've got to tell them what you do. I mean, when I do my taxes, I have to put down attorney. Back when I had other careers, I had to put down what I did for a living. You know, what do you put down? I mean, it makes me think of Al Capone. You know, Al Capone, the mobster way back when, they never put the guy behind bars for the bad things he did. They put him behind bars because of tax evasion. Well, so now, is it going to be the reverse? They won't put marijuana dealers in jail for filing their taxes if they file their taxes, but they'll say, "Oh, Joe, you own a marijuana business in Massachusetts or New Hampshire, and you might think it's legal under the laws there, but guess what? We're going to put you in jail." So in my mind, that issue isn't really resolved. And if anybody has any ideas on that, I would welcome them to send them to us or put them in the comment section or somehow let us know, because there are a lot of unresolved issues. You know, I wrote a blog article on this subject. This is not the first time this has come up in New Hampshire. And back in 2018, the New Hampshire legislature considered this, and they had a study commission. Oh, don't we love study commissions? And they took a look into this. And one of the many things that they said was that in New Hampshire, legal marijuana could raise $57 million in revenue for the state. So, you know, sounds like a lot of money. I don't know if in terms of the entire budget it's a lot of money, but it's something, and it's something that relieves the property tax burden on all of us. So those are my thoughts today. What are yours?
I mean, you know, as far as like the federal portion of it, and even just like filing taxes and stuff, that's not something that I'd considered, but it did raise an interesting point there, because I had gone to a dispensary once, and I have DCU, I have a credit union, and you were able to use like some debit cards there, but I had to pull out my money from an ATM because even like my bank didn't allow transactions from that establishment, which I thought was really interesting. And how you say like it's a federal crime, like that made me think like, oh, like okay, oh, like now that makes a little bit of sense. I mean, ultimately the taxes and stuff are things that are a little bit extremely out of my scope, but I think that it's something, I guess my thought is, you know, and as someone who like occasionally does like smoke, is that people are going to be doing it anyway. People have been doing it for generations. And it's something that I guess for me personally, and this is the same with like alcohol on a level where it would be nice to see it, because I think that when it becomes more common, it becomes a little bit less stigmatized. And if it is less stigmatized, if people need help, if people are struggling with substance abuse issues, it could potentially help someone in a bad position feel a little bit more open about getting the help that they need. And also just the aspect of, we're spending so much money in other states, why not just bring it to New Hampshire? And, you know, I would love to be able to drive 10 minutes to my liquor store and just pick up like weed if I wanted to smoke. So I'm a little biased in that regard.
I think probably a lot of people agree with you. I mean, you know, it's crazy. As I told you before we started doing our podcast today, I drove around a little bit today, and I was doing some other work, and I was doing some things for our next podcast. But I probably went by at least a half a dozen liquor stores in New Hampshire. I wasn't counting, but I'm just thinking in the back of my mind, I must have driven by, just tracking things back in my mind now, I must have driven by, you know, half a dozen liquor stores. They're everywhere in New Hampshire. Mm-hmm. And that's not to mention all of the places where you can buy beer and wine in New Hampshire. I mean, as you know, I go back and forth from Massachusetts to New Hampshire on almost a daily basis because I have offices in both. And, you know, it's funny when you come from Massachusetts into New Hampshire, if there's not a big liquor store, there's Joe's State Line corner store, and they're selling beer, wine, cigarettes, lottery, and then next door a fireworks store. So it kind of amazes me that New Hampshire's the last. I mean, we're circling around we're circling around to the beginning of this conversation, which when we started this off a while ago, we were saying, you know, isn't it weird that, you know, the live free or die state, you know, where people come here to buy their TVs because we have no sales tax, and to buy cigarettes. I mean, you go into any supermarket on the state border or the Big W store, you know, and they have a whole checkout that's just all cigarettes. And so the state has no compunction against selling things that aren't necessarily good for us. I'm not saying marijuana is good or bad, but I think we can all agree that cigarettes are not the best thing for us. But New Hampshire has no qualms at all about having merchants set up shop literally on the border. I mean, on Route 28, coming from Methuen into Salem, right on the border, and literally right on the border. You could stand on the border. There's a little store there. The store's maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, but you go in there and you can buy anything you want. So it's always kind of amazed me that it's taken them this long to say, hey, we can hold our hands out in traffic and get some money on marijuana, just like we do with cigarettes. Because, you know, I'm sorry, folks, I'm an ex-smoker and we're the worst kind, but, you know, why does the state want to make so much money on cigarettes and not marijuana? That's my argument, and I think I share that argument with a lot of people, and I just don't buy. I'm not lessening the argument of drug abuse because I know it's a serious, serious topic, and we're not even going to address that topic in this podcast. I'm not making light of the fact that there is a serious fentanyl crisis in this country, and I'm not making light of the fact that drug abuse has ripped our society apart. Those are separate issues for a separate day, and there are people far above my pay grade who are very articulate on those issues. Mm-hmm. I'm just talking about something that's happening already, folks. If you don't think that people are smoking marijuana already, you have another thought coming. Mm-hmm. So I guess on that note, I don't know. Do you have any closing thoughts? Those are mine.
Yeah, I mean, no, you said it perfectly. I mean, we're the live free or die state. Like, we have all these other things. Like, you don't have to wear helmets, like, when you're on a motorcycle. I had a client that said that they knew someone that unbuckles their seatbelt when they drive into New Hampshire. And like you said it perfectly well. It's just like, you know, like, the state doesn't have problems selling things that are bad for us. Is like, you know, obviously we're selling alcohol, we're selling cigarettes. Alcohol, if someone is struggling with an alcohol addiction and they just try to go cold turkey, it could be fatal. You know, I mean, nobody's dying from not smoking weed, thankfully. I mean, you know, it's not the best thing. And you mentioned like the IQ thing, and I'm sure there's like a million arguments that can be made against it, but you're totally right. It's just like if we're selling cigarettes, which cigarettes have all these additives, like just, like, give people a plant, let them get stoned, and let them chill on their couch. It's like, it's like nobody's going to rob a bank over it. But thank you so much for your time today. Now, where can people find you if they want to learn more about your practice?
Well, as you know, people can go into my website, attorney-myers.com. I've written a lot of blog articles. One of the blog articles I wrote back when they did that study commission was on marijuana and when are they going to legalize it in New Hampshire. And that was 5 years ago. So best way to get a hold of me is to go into our website, attorney-myers.com. And thank you very much for watching.
Thank you guys so much. If you like this video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.
Bye.
You have been watching About the Law, a production of the law offices of Andrew D. Myers in Methuen, in the Merrimack Valley of Massachusetts, and Derry, New Hampshire. Please give us a like and subscribe. The foregoing is offered for informational purpose only. It is not intended as, nor does it constitute, legal advice. Laws vary widely from state to state. You should rely only on the advice given to you during a personal consultation by a local attorney who is thoroughly familiar with state laws and the area of practice in which your concern lies.